ABC television from February 15th through February 22nd of 1987 has had a miniseries on entitled America. And the theme of the whole movie and miniseries is that the United States of America is now occupied by United Nations peacekeeping forces. And of course the peacekeeping forces are from Russia. And it shows throughout the movie flags of the Russian Empire, the red flag with the hammer and sickle, with the United Nations emblem right in the middle, and then to the other side is the American flag. Also, during marches and parades and so on, it showed Lenin's picture, also Abraham Lincoln's picture, preparing the minds of Americans to accept something that is inevitable. This entire scenario started 10 years into the occupation. It didn't tell us at all what happened. How did the Russians take over? How did they do it? So what I want to make 2 points, and then I want to give a scenario of my own as to how this is a possibility, how soon it might happen, and is it biblical? Number one, during the movie, if any of you got to see it, you'll notice that they mention a 5-state region. I've reported before that the United States has already been broken down into 10 regional sections. The United States is no longer one whole country, but has been broken down into 10 federal regions. And the region they specifically dealt with was Missouri, Illinois, Arkansas, Kansas, and Nebraska, and it was called the Central Region. So they mentioned right there regionalism, and we've reported on it already. A second point is that one of the children of one of the women who was one of the managers of this region, he stood up and gave a speech. He had his little red hat on and his red handkerchief around his neck, which they wear in every communist country. And he stood up and gave a very stirring speech, and he said, "The old America is gone forever and it'll never rise." And he said, "Anyone will be crushed who will not enter the new age." And he said it twice. This movie holds more to it than meets the eye. I believe that it was a prepared message for the American people that we are about to be occupied by foreign forces. I want to give some documentation. I can't give you the exact sources every single time, because if the sources are revealed, high-up individuals in government, then that source of information will dry up and it'll disappear. However, Colonel Jack Moore, who was the very first individual ever wounded in the Korean War, he spent 7 years in a concentration camp in the hands of the communists. He bears scars from one end of his body to the other, showing the beatings that he took while in these concentration camps. He has now appeared, he and a Mr. Earl Jones from Demise, New Mexico, has appeared before the Arizona and New Mexico legislatures with the following information. Already Wyoming and Nevada has asked for them to appear before them. Colonel Jack Moore says that he now has in his possession 176 letters from American tourists into Mexico saying that they have actually seen with their own eyes communist troops and their military equipment. All this was seen visibly. Now I want to just hold up one letter from a missionary in Mexico. They heard our radio program, and this letter verifies what he says, from a Mr. Cecil H. White, who is a missionary into Mexico, and he says the same thing, and he said he's been warning people for years of the communist buildup there, and no one will listen to him because it couldn't happen in America. Another point I want to mention. There have literally been visible sightings of one combat unit within 25 miles of El Paso, Texas. In 1982, a man from Alameda, which is next to Brownville, Texas, took a fishing trip close to Ciudad Victoria, Mexico. But it was too windy to fish, and he took several other Americans there. He was their guide. Instead of fishing, they decided to go dove hunting. And this all happened about 40 miles northwest of Ciudad Victoria, Mexico, when suddenly one morning they heard movement of heavy vehicles over a hill. So they went up on the top of the hill and they took pictures of tanks, mechanized vehicles, half-tracks, and all of these had the red Soviet star on them. This is south of Brownsville, Texas. There were 4 Americans who flew 4 different planes, 4-engine planes, and they had clearance to do so. They flew from San Antonio, Texas to Monterrey, Mexico with electronic equipment. They were shot down by planes which had no markings on them, but those individuals who are familiar with aircraft say that they were the modern MiG-26, the most sophisticated Soviet airplanes. They had clearance to fly in this airspace, and yet they were shot down before they reached their destination in Monterey. In the fall of 1984, reports from Del Rio, Texas, by an American citizen of Mexican descent who takes Americans on hunting trips down into Mexico said that all the good Mexicans had moved 200 miles to the north into American territory. And at night, when they were down into Mexico hunting, some of these younger Mexicans that he had picked up to be the guides, the hunting guides for these men, Americans, as they call them, gringos, they would sit around the fire at night while the gringos were asleep. And these young guides would talk about how every one of them had been approached by white foreigners. They thought they were either Russians or East Germans who offered them up to $1,000, large sums of money, so that they would go into the United States, up the Mississippi River, and at a specified time they would blow up all bridges from New Orleans to Chicago. And the reason given for that was because Omaha, Nebraska is the food distribution center for the East Coast. And most of this food crosses at St. Louis, Missouri, and Cairo, Illinois, and goes on westward or eastward into the eastern part of the United States. And if these bridges were blown up within 2 to 3 weeks, there would be food riots all over the eastern seaboard and the greatest populated area in the United States. Now, Colonel Jack Moore was in Montreal, Canada, on a speaking engagement, and he read in a newspaper there, a small newspaper article buried in the very back of the newspaper, a little section which said that there was a party. This was a diplomatic party which was given for a Mexican ambassador to Canada. And the Mexican ambassador stood up and he made a toast to the future mutual border of Canada and Mexico. What is it that stands between Canada and Mexico? The United States. This means if Canada and Mexico would merge their borders, the United States, or at least a section of it, would have to be eliminated. Well, at McAllen, Texas, in 1984, a Baptist missionary stopped Colonel Jack Moore and his friend Earl Jones, who were discussing the Mexican situation. And he told him of a communist buildup in Cuernavaca, Mexico. And he said that he had been there for 8 years and he had heard rumors the entire time that he was there. This was a Baptist missionary in 1984. 8 years before that was 1976. And he said that their plan was to take over a strip about 50 miles wide of land in the southwestern part of the United States from Corpus Christi to San Antonio, Texas. That would be the largest area north of the Mexican border, over to El Paso, and then to Tucson and San Diego, California. And they would take over the strip just a little bit, about a 50-mile range, because they didn't feel the United States would risk an international incident by protecting this strip of land, which is mostly desert. Well, he went on to point out that little by little they planned on taking another 50-mile strip until finally the entire southwestern part of the United States would be taken. Now, in 1986, there was an eyewitness report of, these were Mexican Americans from Demise, New Mexico, who was a friend of a pastor, Earl Jones, there. They went to visit relations on the Baja Peninsula, which is south of California, and they saw North Korean troops all up and down the Baja Strip, and he said you couldn't go into a bar and a nightclub without North Korean troops in uniform. And these are reliable Mexican Americans. Now, all this has been presented already to the New Mexico and Arizona legislatures, while now the Nevada and Wyoming legislatures also wants Earl Jones and Jack Moore to present all of this to them. Now, on January 10th, 1986, there was discovered 5 major crossing points into the United States from Mexico, which are being used by illegal aliens, and many of them have now been stopped. Brownsville, Texas was one of them, Eagle Pass, Texas, Columbus, New Mexico, and Lukeville, Arizona. The 5th one, Colonel Jack Moore did not identify. But the Mexican government has now been busing in large quantities young men into holding areas 25 miles south of the border of the United States. Most of these individuals are not Mexicans. So far, the Border Patrol in 1985 and the early part of 1986 had stopped 32 different nationalities of individuals. They were Czechoslovakian, East German, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Cuba, and Central Americans, and in every single case, they were from countries which were controlled by the communists. Every case, 32 different nationalities. All of these individuals had on them Social Security cards and identification papers to make it look like they were American citizens. In November of 1985, there was an investigative reporter on the El Paso newspaper in Texas. He called Colonel Jack Moore because of an incident that happened to him personally. He reported the apprehension of 7 men from El Paso. They were crossing over the border from El Paso, Texas to Las Cruces, Texas. Anyway, the police confiscated from these 7 men component parts of nuclear devices. And when you put all the component parts together, you had a nuclear bomb. Each one was carrying separate parts. This reporter in the newspaper already had set, ready for print, a 3-inch high headline. And sources in the State Department of the United States called and said under no circumstance were they to print and release this information to the American people. On February 26, 1985, there was a radio station in Tucson, Arizona that made a one-time 10-second announcement, and that's all, one time, that 6 North Korean soldiers in uniform had been captured in a border fight in the Arivaca area of Arizona, which is about 15 miles to the north of the Mexican border. They were captured and they had automatic weapons. North Korean troops. On March 13, 1985, in a Canadian bush pilot, he reported tanks and armored vehicles, personnel carriers, with Russian stars on the side along the Hudson Bay area. Now, I do want to caution on one point here, and that is that there is a possibility this could have been either Canadian or American vehicles, and they only used them as maneuver exercises. That is a possibility. However, the story didn't stop right there, because this man, when he came into the airstrip, he reported it, and immediately he was put in jail and held for the entire weekend, and a high-ranking official from Montreal flew in on a Monday morning and stated to him if he would agree not to breathe a word of what he had seen, he would be freed. So, of course, he agreed, and then immediately began to spread the word when he got out. But in 1976, Congressman Larry McDonald, who was shot down in the 007 airplane, Korean jetliner, he warned that Mexico was going communist. Mr. Steve Sims, who is a senator from Idaho, he receives first-hand information from retired Idaho farmers who now live in Mexico. And all of these individuals are fed up because Mexico is going communist, and they'll lose their entire retirement, their homes, their farms that they now have in Mexico. Now, in October of 1982, 36 House members in the Congress of the United States warned President Reagan that Mexico was ripe for a communist takeover, and yet not one word of this is being released. The Houston Chronicle did pick up part of the information. Now, in August of 1983, Larry McDonald, who was a congressman from Georgia, stated before a committee in Congress that he knew of at least 5 congressmen who were committing treason by helping the communists take over in Mexico and Central America. And he said when he returned from North Korea that he was going to blow the whistle on them and give the evidence that he had. It's very interesting. Larry McDonald never reached Korea. In Korea, they were having a celebration because of the war that ended there. Colonel Jack Moore and his wife were offered free transportation to come because he was the first person wounded in that conflict, and he received a medal from the United States government for bravery. So he was given free tickets, him and Larry McDonald, Also, former President Richard Nixon were going. All of them was going to be on the same plane. Colonel Jack Moore and his wife canceled reservations. Something else came up. The plane was stopped and grounded in Anchorage, Alaska by the CIA. Richard Nixon was taken off the plane. Right after that happened, in the waters off China, the Russians shot down 007 after Richard Nixon was taken off. Now, a Mr. John Ashbrook, who also spoke out about the communist takeover in Mexico, died about this time under very mysterious circumstances. Very mysterious, and they're still talking about it. A Mr. Scoop Jackson, who also was a senator from the state of Washington, he had spoken out about the Mexican takeover by communism, and he gave a very stinging rebuke toward Moscow for the shooting down of the 007 jetliner. Within 3 hours after his stinging rebuke of the Soviet Union, he had a heart attack. So the official doctor's report said. But his doctor, who was right there, stated publicly there was no way he had a heart attack. Are these all just coincidences? Are they? No, I think their people are being silenced. The Soviets in 1976 were given mosaic maps of the Rio Grande River showing all river crossings into the United States of America. Why? Unless they had designs upon the United States. Well, these maps were given to them by the International Boundary and Water Commission. And at the same time that they were given these maps, bridges over Laredo and El Paso, the Rio Grande River going from Mexico into the United States, were strengthened to handle up to 90 tons of material at the same time. Why would they strengthen bridges to support up to 90 tons of material at the same time unless they planned on using them? On December 3rd, 1976, 28 Russian ships unloaded planes and heavy artillery off the coast of Baja. And these were transported by railroad to an area called the Devil's Backbone in Mexico because of all the mountain and the hazardous terrain. All of this military equipment has disappeared. What happened to it? I think we can discover what happened to it in just a minute. Now, in the Laguna Madre area, another Russian transport docked and unloaded. This is on the Gulf side, the Caribbean. Now, remember in the newspaper several years ago, there was this great hoorah that was brought out because Mexico discovered oil, and Mexico was going to have so much oil that they could pay off their international debts, pay off the International Monetary Fund. They would become a prosperous country. No oil hardly has been produced. However, derricks were put up. They were seen pumping water, not oil, from underground mines. Underground mines, natural mines. At Ciudad Victoria, there was one shaft that is 1,068 feet underground. You take elevators and go under the ground, and then it takes you 30 minutes to drive from one end of this huge underground cavern to the other. They've now identified 4 for sure underground caverns that would be large enough to host several platoons of men and heavy military equipment. They feel there is now a possibility for a 5th one. Is this where all the military equipment went? Mexico, previously to that, from 1971 to 1975, had been rebuilding all of their railroads, putting spurs even out into desert areas where there weren't even cities. And they would put spurs off the main railroad tracks so that if a passenger train came along, they would just derail, you might say, or sidetrack the cargo, military, carrying military equipment, so that the passenger train would go on by. Then they would put the military cars back on the track and continue to their destination. Listen to this one. About 60 planes flew about 15,000 feet in altitude at very high speeds over Tucson, Arizona. There were so many calls to the police station, and they didn't know what it was either, that finally they called David Monson Air Force Base, which is an interceptor Air Force base for the United States, looking for, 24 hours a day, unidentified objects intruding into our airspace. They said, we don't know what it was. We close at 10 p.m. And I realize that this is very upsetting. I realize that when they tell us these things. But anyway, there were two MiG-26 Russian fighters, these are Soviet planes, that were seen visibly with their red star on the side by hundreds of individuals over Knoxville, Tennessee. They were followed by one American interceptor plane, but the government would say nothing as to what this was all about. There have been, this is in recent months, 5 Soviet nuclear submarines that surfaced off the east coast of the United States and 10 that surfaced off the west coast. This was in late 1985. Our State Department said it was simple maneuvers and it was routine. Now, what they didn't point out was these particular nuclear submarines, they carry 20 missiles each with multiple warheads. And the range of these warheads are up to 1,500 miles. 1,500 miles, and from both sides, both coasts, they could reach any target they wanted to in the United States of America. Well, I think all these things are interesting. But is America setting us up, that series America? Are they literally setting us up for something that is inevitable? They didn't tell us how the United Nations occupation forces came into this country. They didn't tell us that there was probably going to be terrorism and that the streets of America would become so bloody that we would call for an international organization to come in to keep the peace. They didn't tell us any of this. All we saw was the United Nations emblem and the Russian and American flag right next to it. In Revelation chapter 17, I'll read from the New International Version. It says, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. Then in verse 7 it says, and he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. Everyone on the face of the earth would be subject to this beast power rising on the world scene. In Revelation chapter 17, verse 1, Revelation 17, verse 1, I'll just read the last phrase. It talks about this great whore that sits upon many waters. This great whore, and it's going to sit upon waters. What are waters in Bible terminology? We must let the Bible interpret the Bible, and we can't put our own interpretation into it or we'll run aground. Verse 15 gives us the answer. And he said unto me, the waters which you saw where the whore sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Here it is. A great government is going to rise over all nations, and it's going to come up from all peoples on every part of the globe. Is it happening today? Yes, it is happening. Let's look at verse 18 now. Same chapter, Revelation 17. And the woman which you saw is that great city, which reigns over the kings of the earth. Here is a great city, and it's going to rule over the kings of the earth. But who is that great city? Ultimately, when this world dictatorship is set up, there will be one city from which all directives come forth. It's going to be a whore, a false system, because will worship the individual who sits in the temple there as God, and will have to reject our God in order to be alive in this system. And not only that, but it'll have a governmental system. See, it's going to be a theocracy. Ruled over, government and church the same. The whole system. It's going to be a duplicate of what God is going to do, so that it'll deceive everybody on the face of the earth except the very elect. And when you look out in the masses of Christianity today, they're being set up for loss of their calling. And they're going to be deceived, because the greater the teachings are where people are not living according to the Bible, and the more you learn and the more you educate yourself to what the Bible really says, the narrower and the fewer people there are that are going to obey the Bible. So it's going to be narrowed down to the very elect. But in Revelation 11, let's identify that city which will ultimately rule the world. Verse 2, and the court, this is talking about a temple in verse 1, and the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles. And the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months, 3.5 years. Look in verse 3. And I'll give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days in sackcloth. 1,260, 1,260 days, divided by 30 days in a month is 3.5 years. Here are 2 witnesses with the power of God to tell people this is not the correct system. And they'll be witnessing during that 3.5 year period. Now look at verse 7 and 8. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of that great city. Here is the great city that is going to rule over the kingdoms of the earth when this final beast system rises, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, because there is no truth in it, where also our Lord was crucified. Where was Jesus Christ crucified? Jerusalem, Palestine. This is going to be the great city that will rule over all nations, and the world will be divided up into 10 global groupings, and each of the 10 kings ruling over each individual kingdom will then answer to the beast dictator, the world governor in Palestine, in the city of Jerusalem. But how is this affecting us today? How is it already beginning to affect us? In the last few years, have you ever noticed how people no longer are dressing up? I'm talking about the average person, but they're beginning to dress down, because where it used to be one man would head up the family, he would work, the mother would stay home, take care of the children, the home, and now all of a sudden you've got all the children plus the mother and father out working to have the same standard of living which the father used to provide. This is happening in America. Right now in America, 71 million are paying income tax, while 81 million now exist on checks they receive from the government. This means you and I are supporting those of us who pay taxes over 50% of those who receive any type of earnings and income in this country. This is called a welfare state. Barry Goldwater said that the welfare state is here. The only thing that can change it is a total collapse economically and start from scratch all over again like our forefathers did back in 1789. Well, the value of the dollar has gone down. We elected the most conservative president, at least vocally, he said so, in the history of the United States in 1980, and he's still in his second term, and yet our deficit spending this year alone will be over $200 billion. And in his 2 terms of office, he will have created more debt than every president since the institution of this country combined. The most conservative president. This will further destroy the value of the dollar so that we'll no longer have a higher standard of living. And this is exactly what they want. And remember, in one part of this story, Amerika, that was televised, they said, we must have an equal standard of living with the Russians. Oh yes, this is exactly what was stated by the president of the Ford Foundation, Mr. Gaither. He said he had been receiving directives from the White House for many years to so alter the neighborhoods and the lifestyle of Americans so they could comfortably merge us into a world government with the Soviet Union. This is taking place today. This is what America was all about on ABC television. Now, stop and think for a minute. We've had the most conservative president elected in many, many years, since this decade. They don't believe, those individuals who are in our government right now, say the reason why they do not go along with any of the programs that President Reagan has had is that they don't want to build our military arsenal because they think nuclear war is an unthinkable thing. I agree with them. Nuclear war is unthinkable. But at the same time, there is no alternative if the Soviet Union is going to continue to build its massive armaments. Those liberals in Congress who will not go along with the rebuilding of American military apparatus also say that there is a clear alternative to war. That is to surrender the sovereignty of the United States and go into a world government with the Soviet Union. And it's called the New World Order. And the United Nations or another world organization would head it up. These liberals are also convinced that as the Soviets right now far surpass us in military missile power, they've now encircled us with bases in Cuba, Nicaragua, they're working on El Salvador, and as I've shown, they now have military equipment in Mexico, and they have nuclear-armed submarines off both the east and west coasts of the United States. They feel that the American people will firmly demand that our government accede to the Soviet ultimatum to turn all of our military equipment over to the United Nations peacekeeping forces. This is our liberals in Congress. I want to just mention an organization which probably no one has ever even heard of. It's called the Members of Congress for Peace Through Law. Right now, there's 269 congressmen of the United States who are members of this organization. Their purpose and their goal is to merge the United States into a world government with the Soviet Union. 269 members. I'll give you just a few of the past members. Mr. Hubert Humphreys, of course he's dead now. Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski. These were all members of this organization. And right now, currently, there's 269 members of our Congress. No wonder the Constitution of the United States is being overlooked. Also, those liberals in Congress, they say that we must choose to ignore the fact that the United Nations is already dominated by the Soviets, and that the head of the peacekeeping force, since Alger Hiss first prepared the United Nations Charter, has always been a communist. Always. It has never failed, and that'll tell you why the United States of America has never won a war since World War II. Since the United Nations was incepted in 1945, there's been 12 undersecretaries for political and security council affairs. In every single case, these men have been communists. 11 Russian communists and 1 Yugoslav communist. And I've got the names of every single one of them. And I want to read to you now a statement in the book, In the Cause of Peace, by one of the former Secretary Generals of the United Nations, Mr. Lai. Here's what he said. Mr. Brzezinski of the USSR did not delay his approach. This approach was when the United States of America, or when the United Nations organization wanted to appoint another person as head of this military apparatus of the United Nations, they wanted it to be an American. So this Russian, Mr. Brzezinski, approached Mr. Lai, and here's what he said. He was the first to inform me of an understanding which the Big Five had reached in London on the appointment of a Soviet national as the Assistant Secretary General for Political and Security Council Affairs. Mr. Stetness, the United States Secretary of State, confirmed to me that he had agreed with the Soviet delegation in the matter. The preservation of international peace and security was the organization's highest responsibility. And the Americans had agreed to entrust the direction of the Secretariat Department most concerned with peace to the Soviet nationals. And that was page 45 and 46 of his book. So now do we see why there has never been a military victory for the United States since World War II? In Korea, the head of the peacekeeping operations was a communist. Every general, every colonel, before they had a plan of operation, had to submit it to the head of the United Nations 24 hours in advance. He would pass on the information to the communist North Koreans. Same thing in Vietnam. And so that we could never win a victory. So the United States has been losing out in prestige all over the world. No one can trust the United States anymore. And the communists have all the momentum going on their side because of this United Nations Charter, which we're a member of. Also, the large tax-exempt foundations, such as the Ford and Rockefeller Foundation, since the days of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, have admittedly been using their grant-making power, quote, to so alter life in the United States as to make possible a comfortable merger with the Soviet Union, end of quote. This is reality. This is what the miniseries America was telling us about, that it's going to happen. There's nothing we can do to stop it. That's what they wanted us to believe. During recent decades, we have seen our life, I have just in my lifetime of 46 years, change economically, politically. I've seen where you cannot reach your political senators, representatives with anything that you want in Congress. Educationally, I've seen it change in America. Culturally, to where we don't have a culture that originally settled this country anymore. And morally, it has decayed to where it would become closer to that of the Soviet Union. And our people have now accepted these alternative lifestyles rather than risk nuclear war and devastation. So we are now being prepared mentally to give in to the Soviet Union. There has been persistent rumors. I want to underscore the word rumor. It is not fact. It is rumored out of Washington, D.C. It has been for a year now that President Reagan will resign before his term is over. This is strictly rumor. Now, whether it will be health reasons or whether it will be something like the Iran Gate to force him out of office, I don't know. But the rumors say that he'll resign, so George Bush, former member of the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, a member of the Order, all of these organizations working for world government can take over. And it has already been reported, and the rumor persists. And usually where there's smoke, there's fire somewhere. And the rumor persists that those in Congress, members of Congress for Peace Through Law, have already worked out a proposal for the dismantling of America and surrender to the Soviet Union by 1988. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just reporting what consistently keeps coming out. And if it happens, why did they use in this movie America 1997 as a starting point, and it said it was the 10th year of occupation? When you back up 10 years, that's 1987. Well, they do have something in mind, because all of those reports coming out of Mexico, these individuals, communists, said that their plan was to take over the southwest part of the United States by 1986. Of course, we know it didn't happen, but they're very patient individuals. They're working for world government. And so they're very patient. If they don't meet their deadline one time, they'll just set a new objective and work toward it until finally that objective is reached. They've done it all over the world. The Soviet Union overthrew the Tsar, then they overthrew Mongolia, then they went into Central Europe, took all of Central Europe from World War II, then they took China, 1949 and 50, North Vietnam, North Korea, now they've got all of Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, they're in Afghanistan, they've taken many countries in Africa. They said that they would encircle the oil fields and the mineral-rich deposits in South Africa, and then by the time they encircled the United States, we would fall into their hands like an overripe grapefruit, and they wouldn't have to fire a bullet. Well, are these things happening? When we look back on the world scene, every word they've said is coming true. And this fits with Bible prophecy that a great government is going to rise out of the earth. It is called a beast. In the book, Four Trojan Horses by a Mr. Harry Kahn, it stated that our official defense policy is totally wrong. He says the Russians have never deviated from their original plan of world domination. They proclaim their intention, he says, to bury the West. And he continues by stating that our leaders in government have deliberately, and that's his word, eliminated our former military superiority over the Soviet Union. But how did they do this? And who are they? Well, in the article, Humanists versus Puritans by Pat Brooks, I want to read 3 paragraphs from it. I quote, "Our present peril is this," talking to America, "an unelected elite has gained control of the reins of government and media through 6 decades of cunning. For the last 60 years, daring even to use our electoral process to plant their puppets in places of authority. This ruling caste puts its heels upon our necks. Government of, by, and for the people will indeed perish from the earth unless we throw off the chains being planned to enslave us. An international banking elite holds these chains. The late Professor Carroll Quigley identified the international banking families in Tragedy and Hope. That was his book, a 1,000-page book, and he identified those as he was an insider keeping some of the books for them for over 20 years. Here's some of them that he named. Baring, international banking family. Lazard, some of these are from Europe as well as the United States. Erlanger, Warburg, Schroeder, Seligman, Spears, Mirabaugh, Millay, Fowle, and above all, Rockefeller, Rothschild, and Morgan's, J.P. Morgan Trust. In the United States, he said that the period between 1880 to 1933 established the tycoons of big banking and big business, and that's when the program of international monopolies of business to rule the world got underway. And he said that there were two power factors in the United States, and when they cooperated together, one of them was J.P. Morgan in New York, and the other was the Rockefeller family with Standard Oil in Ohio. And when they actually cooperated together, they could change the economic life of this entire country. And they are the ones who own stock in the Federal Reserve System. Now, I'll continue to quote. The founder of the earliest mammoth banking empire was Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who lived from 1743 to 1812 in Frankfurt, Germany. He kept one of his 5 sons at home to head the branch bank and sent the other 4 sons to establish branch banks in London, Paris, Vienna, and Naples. Quigley reports that Rothschild's male descendants for at least 2 generations generally married first cousins or even nieces. The Rothschild followed such policies to establish dynasties of international bankers and were at least as successful in this as many of the dynastic political rulers. So many of the kings and so on in Europe, where they used to intermarry only within families, this is the way the Rothschilds did it. Married within their own family and kept all of their money right there. Now, this newly organized House of Rothschild, which Rothschild literally means red shield. Look at the flag of the Soviet Union. It's red, isn't it? It's a red shield is what it is. He commissioned a man by the name of Adam Weishaupt to found the Order of the Illuminati. Weishaupt was trained in canon law while he was teaching at Ingolstadt University. He actually rejected Christianity and he took upon himself Luciferian worship. And he took, by this, the full Luciferian conspiracy. Now this recently organized, this was in the 1750s and 60s, House of Rothschild also paid Weishaupt to revise and modernize what is called the Protocol, the final world program for world takeover. And it was a strategic plan for Luciferian worshipers for final world domination. Weishaupt completed this job on May 1st, 1776. And in every single country in the world, it's called, where communists rule, it's called May Day. And they have big celebrations around a pole, and they have streamers coming out from it, and they march around the maypole. And this is a celebration of the completion of the final world program for world government by the Illuminati. And a religious organization that I belonged to when I was growing up, I went to their college, graduated from the university, they always celebrated May Day. Didn't even know what they were doing. This plan of the Illuminati called for the destruction of all existing governments and religions. This destruction was to be achieved by dividing the masses of people into opposing camps politically, like Republicans, Democrats, Independents. Keep dividing, dividing, dividing. Also, they were to do it on a social level. And they were to do it racially, divide the people, and economically. and pit them against each other. And this is exactly what has been taking place in America today. And I have a booklet, which I'm going to bring very soon, or else publish it in a magazine, that was put out, documentation by Congressman Larry McDonald, showing, even with pictures in it, showing that Martin Luther King Jr. was a communist agent. And this now has been suppressed and put in top secret files by the government of the United States that can't be opened to the year 2027. Why? He begged Congress not to let these files be classified as top secret until all the American people could be the judge based upon FBI documents, which he had possession of, and he even quoted them. And yet the Congress went ahead and passed a holiday for a communist who was dividing the country and opposing racially to destroy America. This is just one example. It's this way in religions too. They infiltrate religions to create differences within various churches, to split them and split them and split them. That's why God says, come out of them. Be you separate. There's only going to be the very elect who are going to survive at the end of the age. That's why Jesus said when he comes, will he find faith in the earth? Because this is going to be so destructive unless you know where you stand, what God's Word does say, you will fall by the wayside. You will be deceived, disillusioned with what's going on in the world. Well, the name Illuminati was chosen by this organization because it derived its name from Lucifer, and it means holders of the light. And those who are in the New Age movement today, David Spangler and others, have stated clearly that it is Lucifer who is giving light to the world. He's the one who heads up the evolutionary process that is taking place in the earth today. There is no difference. Atheistic Russia is not really atheistic. It is for those who are in charge of it outwardly, but those who are secret controllers receive all their power from Lucifer. It's that simple. The Bible states so in Revelation 13:2. And it is true because they even admit it. Now, under the guise of creating a one-world government ruled over by the illuminated ones, those who have been given light by Lucifer, they were to prevent future wars. Adam Weishaupt, through the Rothschild money fortune, recruited approximately 2,000 paid men in Europe. These were very intelligent men in the fields of art, education, science, law, finance, and industry. And he established the Grand Orient Masonic Lodge to be the secret headquarters of the Illuminati. Now, the lesser brethren in that lodge were not to have any knowledge of what was going on. And he was acting under the direct orders of the House of Rothschild. Now, this is all interesting. A Mr. Myron Fagan, who actually was asked by the Senate Subcommittee on Un-American Activities to infiltrate into the Illuminati in the United States, to all the houses of movie-making houses in Hollywood and so on, he went in and he exposed all of their goals and their way of attaining those goals. Here's what he said, and he recorded this, and it was given to the Senate Un-American Activities Committee. He said, number one, they use money and sex bribery to hold control over men in high government positions. Now do we see why various government personnel in the United States will not stand up for America? They get them embroiled in houses of prostitution and so on, and they blackmail them into submission. And they do this with people in every key field of influence. And it's through the threat of blackmail and financial ruin that they'll be exposed to the mass media if they don't go along with their family. He said that a part of their program also was the threat of physical harm, not only to themselves, but to their families, in order to keep them in absolute control. Then he went on to show that the Illuminati had facilities of the two major colleges and universities where they would send talented students to train them. These were the elite families of the world. And they would train them in world government, because these international-leaning families who wanted trade all over the world for their companies were natural candidates. He said that there was a school in England, and they offered what is called Rhodes Scholarships to train for internationalism and to indoctrinate them into the idea of world government to prevent wars. Also, remember a Mr. William J. Fulbright when he was in the Congress of the United States? He was a Rhodes Scholarship. When you look at his voting record, it is 100% Illuminati. 100%. Everything, every goal of the Illuminati, he voted for it. And there are 3 additional Illuminati schools. One of them is Gordonstown, Scotland, another Salome, Germany, and another one in Anabrida, Greece. And these schools, there are other schools, but they're generally kept secret. Mr. Myron Fagan also said that all influential people who were trapped into coming under the control of the Illuminati, plus the students who had been specially trained and educated, were to be used as agents to go in behind the scenes of governments. They were to become experts, specialists. They were to advise the top executives to adopt their policies that in the long run would dominate the administration of every government so that they would work toward world government without the knowledge of the government leaders themselves. And then he went on to show, and this was a very vital directive, that they planned to control the press absolutely. And at the time this started, there was no such thing as television. But since that time, they control, and I'm just talking about the United States of America only, not Europe. They control every major chain of newspapers in the United States, including the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the Des Moines Register, all the chains of newspapers. They're now going throughout the United States into the suburbs where they have these little journals that are thrown out for advertising on a weekly basis. They're buying them up all over the United States. They control your major ABC, NBC, CBS television networks. They control mutual radio broadcasting and so on. And the only ones who are not controlled are independent radio stations. And some of them who are owned locally, but they may only hook up with the affiliate for the news, from the network news. Now do you understand why ABC, NBC, and CBS all came out in recent years with threats of nuclear war and so on, the day after on ABC? So that they could prepare our minds to submit to world government rather than being blown up. And then we come out with America, programming our mind that those who will not enter the new age will be crushed. Isn't that exactly what Barbara Marx Hubbard wrote in her book, Co-Creation? Revelation, the book of Co-Creation, where a spirit guide actually told her what to write and she wrote it down, and a spirit guide as demons. Oh yes, we're living in the end of the age. We're living at a time when this world government is rising. I want to skip over some of this material today to get on to some other information that has to do with this movie Amerika. Because you see, you and I have been brainwashed for many, many years now. We have been listening to the mass media. We have not been listening to our Constitution of the United States. We have not been out on the firing lines standing for freedom. There is nothing in the Congress of the United States that upsets liberals and left-wingers as much as if you equate socialism with communism. Ever since 1905 in the United States, when the Intercollegiate Socialist Society was established, the socialist liberals have tried to give the term socialism a respectable name, but it didn't work. Originally, when this socialistic movement started taking over America and coming into this country, our people knew what it was all about. They actually were forced to change their name in 1921 to the Intercollegiate Socialist Society. From that name to the League for Industrial Democracy. And this is nothing but pure socialism, because their whole motto was production for use, not for profit. That's exactly what they do in the Soviet Union. That way there is no profit motive and the whole system collapses around your ears. See? No profit motive. But socialism became such a scare word by 1905 that finally They changed the name in 1921. However, listen to some of the names of those individuals who received awards. They were cooperators with the socialists from 1905 to 1955. Some of you will know these names. Ralph Bunch, George S. Counts, Clarence Darrow, Eugene Debs. Remember John Dewey, who started progressive education in the United States? Senator Paul Douglas, David Dubinsky, Senator Hubert Humphrey, who was a socialist, Max Lerner, another socialist, Walter Lippmann, George Meany, both socialists, Senator Wayne Morris, A.J. Muskie, and the list could go on. I'll only mention two others. Walter Reuther, head of one of the biggest unions in the United States, and then Eleanor Roosevelt, wife of former President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now here's what a socialist by the name of Norman Thomas predicted. He ran 6 times for the presidency of the United States. He was defeated, of course, every time. Here's what he said, quote, "The American people will never knowingly adopt socialism, but under the name of liberalism, they'll adopt every fragment of the socialist program until America will one day be a socialist nation without knowing how it happened." End of quote. Aren't we being socialized today? Oh yeah, socialized medicine, Medicare. Then you have Social Security. That's socialism. Then you have job service, guaranteeing if you're laid off a job, then they will give you so much money. That's socialism. Right down the line, every fabric of society today is now a socialist country. We're there. All we need is a dictator or an occupation of the country. Here's a communist prediction. We just saw a socialist. Here's a communist prediction in 1959 by Mr. Khrushchev. This was 3 months before he came to the United States. Quote, "We can't expect the American people to jump from capitalism to communism, but we can assist their leaders, the elected leaders, in giving them small doses of socialism until they awaken one day to find they have communism." End of quote. This is happening in America. This is the land where we live. These same goals have not changed. They haven't changed since 1917 when V.I. Lenin made the statement that capitalism and socialism cannot live side by side. One would be crushed and only one would remain. On April 24th, 1920, the Joint Legislative Committee investigating seditious activities filed in the Senate of the State of New York a 4-volume report known as the Lusk Report. Here's what it says. Quote, this is the general introduction of Volume 1. Here's what it says. Quote, "Those representing the socialist point of view are the Socialist Party of America, Communist Party of America, the Communist Labor Party, and the Socialist Labor Party. A study of their platforms and official pronouncements shows that they do not differ fundamentally in their objectives. These objectives are the establishment of a cooperative commonwealth in place of the present form of government in the United States." Isn't that treason? The overthrow of what they are pleased to call the capitalist system. It hasn't changed, not once. Or else why does nation after nation fall under the hammer and sickle? The goal of international communism is to centralize all power in Washington, D.C. This is the prime goal. If the socialists and the communists can destroy states' rights, then they can effectively control the one government that governs the entire nation. They only have one battle to win. Now listen to what the 10th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States says. Quote, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved." Okay, if the federal government wasn't given specific directorates, these are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Nowhere in the Constitution of the United States has the government, federal government, ever been given any power or control over education, health, welfare, labor, dams, public power works, agriculture, unemployment, or housing. And yet, The federal government today controls every one of those. Has Nikita Khrushchev and Norman Thomas's predictions been coming true? They would legislate socialism upon the American people till one day we would wake up and have communism. And now on America, the miniseries, they've actually shown the occupation by the Soviet Union of this country, preparing our minds to accept this entire program. Now, we've got to remember that socialism, someone in this country had to be the instigators of socialism. What I want to do is give you a speech that was given by J. Edgar Hoover before the American Legion. And this is who was the former director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This was 1957. And you say, well, that was 30 years plus ago. What does that have to do with me? Listen to what he said. Quote, "To dismiss lightly the existence of the subversive threat in the United States is to deliberately commit national suicide. In some quarters, we're doing exactly that." End of quote. National suicide by turning our head and letting socialism take over. Nobody calls it treason, which it is. The July 30th, 1953 report of the Jenner Committee in the Congress of the United States stated this. The conclusions of the committee were stated in a report as follows. The Soviet International Organization has carried on a successful and important penetration of the United States government. And this penetration has not been fully exposed. That was way back in the 50s. Also it said, number 2, this penetration has extended from the lower ranks to the top level policy and operating positions in our government. Number 3, the agents of this penetration have operated in accordance with a distinct design fashioned by their Soviet superiors, who also are now controlled by the international banking fraternities. The Soviets have superiors also. Number 4, members of this conspiracy helped to get each other into government, helped each other to rise in government, and protected each other from exposure. Number 5, in general, the communists who infiltrated our government worked behind the scenes. Here's what they do according to this report of 1953. They guide research and prepare memoranda on which basic American policies are set. They write up our policies and recommend them to the government, to the presidents, who literally know little to nothing when they go in as president of the United States. So they set the policy, and then the administration puts it into action. They write speeches for cabinet members, influencing congressional investigations. Congressional investigations like who are communists, what happened to John F. Kennedy, who assassinated him, and then they close the files on that until after the year 2000 because they figure they'll have us merged into a world government before then, and it won't matter. It says they draft laws. They manipulate administrative reorganizations, always serving the interest of their Soviet superiors. Number 6, policies of the program laid down by the members of this Soviet conspiracy are still in effect within our government and constitute a continuing hazard to our national security. This is what's taking place in America today. This is why they could become so brazen and just open up on national television that the occupation of the United States is inevitable. And they said it right out. Even though they said in little letters afterward, this is only fictional. Oh yes, but how would they know about Metro Regional 1313, that the country would be broken down into 10 regions unless they knew about it? How would they put that in there? How would they actually even use the phraseology New Age unless they are a part of it? Oh yes, they had too many clues, and the American people wouldn't even know it unless they have the information that we have. And then you can pick the whole program apart and see that it was set up to demoralize us and to tell us, America, you can't win, so give up. Well, I only want to mention one little part left in the message this morning. Who is doing it right now in America? We know that the international banking fraternity are the ones who are doing it. But there was a man in 1913 who happened to be the right-hand man, the alter ego of the President Woodrow Wilson at that time. He founded what is called the Council on Foreign Relations in 1921. It's a private group which is headquartered at the corner of Park Avenue and 68th Street in New York City. And it's in a building that was donated by the Rockefeller family in 1929. Now, the founder of the Council on Foreign Relations was a man by the name of Edward Mandell House. He was the chief advisor of President Woodrow Wilson. And House was not only Woodrow Wilson's most important aide, but Woodrow Wilson actually depended upon him completely. He said that he was his alter ego, and that was in print in newspapers. And he is the one who dominated totally the Wilson administration. Unfortunately for America, Mr. Mandell House was also a Marxist, and his goal was the socialization of the United States. Now, in 1912, Mr. House wrote the book Philip Drew, Administrator. In that book, he said he was working, quote, for the socialization of America as dreamed by Karl Marx, end of quote. Now, the original edition of this particular book did not give his name as the author, but he made it clear through various things written in it that he indeed was the author. In this book, Philip Drew, Administrator, Edward Mandell House laid out a fictionalized plan for the conquest of America. He told, and this is his own word, of a conspiracy. What is a conspiracy? It's something done in secret for the overthrow of governments or religious organizations or the overthrow of some organized institution. And he said that he would gain control of the Democratic and Republican parties. And by gaining control of both of these, he would use them as an instrument to socialize America for world government. He called in this book for the passage of a graduated income tax. The more you earn, the more is taken away from you. And for the establishment of a state-controlled central bank. These were the steps toward the ultimate goal of socializing America. Both of these just happened to be planks of the Communist Manifesto. Just happened to be. And both of them just happened to be passed into law the very first year in 1913 of the House-dominated Woodrow Wilson administration. Was he a socialist? Was he a part of the plan to destroy the United States of America? Also in this book, Edward Mandell House called for the United States to give up its sovereignty to the League of Nations at the close of World War I. Well, when he wrote the book, World War I had not even happened. Did he know that it was going to happen? I think he did. But since there were enough loyal Americans, they would not ratify the agreement to found the League of Nations after World War I. So then they went to work to foment another world war. And then after it, they already had set up, and while World War II as early as 1942 and 43 was still going on, they were already given credit for the peace in Europe to a newly formed organization called the United Nations. And yet it had not even been founded until 1945. And they called it Allied Troops. This is what they call, instead of just the United Nations peacekeeping troops. Well, by 1944, Mr. House died. However, others came along. The Council on Foreign Relations, by this time, were already putting up their own men as presidents in the Democratic Party. They boasted of such men as, well, later on, Nixon. But you had Thomas Dewey was the first one. You had Roosevelt, who became president 3 terms. We had to pass into law an amendment to the Constitution to keep the president from just 2 terms. That's all, limit him. Because Roosevelt was a socialist, and they were worried about socialism taking over America. Other people who were put up for the presidency of the United States as a CFR member were Eisenhower, Nixon, Stevenson, Kennedy, Humphrey, McGovern, And now every single presidential administration is totally dominated, including the present one, Ronald Reagan administration, by Council on Foreign Relations members. Every conservative that helped Mr. Reagan into office has now been kicked out and replaced by a Council on Foreign Relations member. Every single one of them. To be exact, Jimmy Carter, his administration was totally dominated. His opponent, Mr. Walter Mondale, was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And also, he said he was a humanist. So you see, these people have totally dominated the presidency and their cabinet members ever since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And now they have an ironclad grip upon America. Other top Carter administration appointees were Joseph Califano, Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, CFR member. Patricia Harris, she was also Secretary of HUD, member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Stanfield Turner, CIA Director, Council on Foreign Relations. Zygmunt Brzezinski, who is the Presidential National Security Advisor. And I only want to mention one thing about Zygmunt Brzezinski as I begin to bring this to a close. When you read the book Between Two Ages, which is written by Zygmunt Brzezinski in 1970, here are some of the quotes from his book. Then you can see why the movie America was put on television. Here's what he said on page 72. Marxism is simultaneously a victory of the external, active man over the inner passive man, and a victory of reason over belief. So he says Marxism is a victory. On page 83 he says, Marxism disseminated on the popular level in the form of communism represented a major advance in man's ability to conceptualize his relationship to his world. Marxism. This is Zygmunt Brzezinski, who happened to be the top man for Jimmy Carter. Page 123, he wrote, Marxism supplied the best available insight into contemporary reality. On page 198, he talks about America's shortcomings. He says, America is undergoing a new revolution which unmasks its obsolescence. He says our Constitution is obsolete and it must be changed. Changed how? Could it be by an occupation force? Because terrorism in the southwest part of the United States becomes so violent that we need a peacekeeping force to come in to occupy? Could it be because bridges are going to be blown up along the Mississippi River so that food supplies can't get up into the populated Northeast? I don't know. We'll wait and see. These were only plans which were laid down. And then if food riots start, then occupying forces can come in peacefully in the name or under the banner of United Nations. On page 260 of his book, Between the Two Ages, he wrote that he proposed a deliberate management of the American future. What did we see on this movie, America? Certain people were put in as managers to manage things, with the planner as the key social legislator and manipulator. That was portrayed graphically in the movie America. On page 296, Mr. Brzezinski said that he suggests piecemeal movement toward a community of nations. Isn't that what's been happening since 1974 with the Declaration of Interdependence of All Nations by the United Nations Organization? Oh yes, we are heading straight into this world organization. Now, I want to bring it to a close with a couple of scriptures. These things are reality. The movie America that did appear on television was to prepare our minds to accept what they have planned for us. People in this country say, oh, it couldn't happen here. It's only a fictionalized movie. No, they have it planned. And it's like Satan rubbing his plan in our face because we're so gullible we can't believe that it can happen in America. In Jeremiah chapter 18, verse 7 and 8, at what instant I shall speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom. This is God Almighty talking. To pluck up and to pull down and to destroy it. So if God says, look, I'm going to destroy this nation, If that nation against whom I've pronounced turn from their evil, massive repentance on wholesale level in the United States, I will repent of the evil that I thought to do unto them. If this nation would repent totally and come back to God and all of His Bible, then this nation could be spared. If we will not do it, the nation is doomed to destruction and be merged into this world government. In Isaiah chapter 24, verse 1 to 6, behold, the Lord makes the earth empty and makes it waste, and turns it upside down and scatters the inhabitants thereof. And it shall be, as with the people, so with the prince. It says priest in King James, but it should be prince, the ruler. The same thing is going to happen to every person regardless of your economic strata, your social position. We're all going to have troubles in this country. Verse 3, the land shall be utterly emptied and utterly spoiled, for the Lord has spoken this word. The earth mourns and fades away. The world languishes and fades away. The haughty people of the earth do languish. It's going to be a terrifying time. Verse 5, the earth also is defiled. The Hebrew word is polluted under the inhabitants thereof, because they've transgressed the laws, and they're God's laws. And yet churches today teach they're done away. This is why there are such massive problems on the world scene. They have changed the ordinance that is in the Bible. The word ordinance is number 2706 in the Hebrew Strong Concordance. It means God's festivals, and we've substituted pagan days and call them Christian. Broken the everlasting covenant, because we've thrown God's laws, God's festivals, God's covenant to the ground. Verse 6, therefore has the curse devoured the earth. And it says in the last three words, few men left. There is going to be such destruction that only the very elect will survive all of this, and there will be nuclear war. But in Hebrews 13, I admonish you to learn what this means. Learn it. Hebrews chapter 13. Make sure you stick by it. Don't let people deceive you with false doctrines, false teachings that take you out of a true knowledge of God's everlasting covenant. Hebrews 13, verse 20 and 21. Now the God of peace that brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, that great shepherd of the sheep, through the blood of the everlasting covenant. Jesus shed His blood because there is an everlasting covenant. And Psalms 105, verse 7 to 10 says clearly, He first gave that covenant with Abraham. There was no such thing as animal sacrifices. Only the covenant. Then He gave it to Isaac. Then He repeated it to Jacob. He gave it to Israel for a law and an everlasting covenant. Not the animal sacrifices. That's what reconciles us back to God. Now we have the blood sacrifice of Jesus to reconcile us from breaking that everlasting covenant. We refer to it now as the new covenant because it has better promises of eternal life. And God's Holy Spirit to write His same set of laws into our heart and our minds so that now we can be circumcised in heart and not just in the flesh. Brethren, I admonish you to learn and obey this everlasting covenant, because I believe this movie, Amerika, was designed to show us what is going to happen very soon in this country. God be with you in your effort to learn His ways.